Transformers Fall of Cybertron is the most critically acclaimed Transformers game of all time. The game depicts the late stages of the planet-spanning Cybertronian civil war, which has ruined their homeworld. This sequel to Transformers War for Cybertron surprised me in how it innovated its gameplay and pushed the envelope even further in terms of presentation, albeit at an often grave cost of performance. Like its predecessor, Fall of Cybertron was developed by High Moon Studios, which is still around now but functions as a Call of Duty support studio. Between War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron, the studio also produced the movie tie-in game Transformers Dark of the Moon, which was not very well received. It's great the team at High Moon got to take a second crack at an original Transformers game after the failure of Dark of the Moon. It's clear that High Moon loved working with the Transformers IP, and having more creative control over their own game is really where they excelled. The changes to gameplay in Fall of Cybertron caught me off guard. I was anticipating a refinement of what came before in War of Cybertron, but the devs really changed the mechanics and systems of the story mode. In Fall of Cybertron, the campaign is entirely single-player focused. The multiplayer servers for the game have been offline for a while, so if you come back for a playthrough like I did, you'll probably appreciate this design choice. This is unlike War for Cybertron, which was designed with campaign co-op in mind, and this feature bled into the overall design of it, as players were always part of a squad of 3 other Transformers. In that game, at the start of each chapter, you could pick from one of 3 Cybertronians to play as, each with differing abilities. With Fall of Cybertron being entirely single-player focused, each level feels more unique and designed around a character's specific abilities and gimmicks. I prefer this as it makes each chapter feel more memorable and keeps players on their toes. Previously, the biggest design difference in levels were if they were built for flyers or not. There's still a few flying missions around this time, but there's also stealth-focused levels and even some segments that play more like a hack and slash game than a third-person shooter.
That thing is huge!
Wrecking shit as Bruticus or Grimlock was always fun, and stealthing around and wreaking havoc as Starscream seems spot on for his character.
You picked on the wrong...
It's not just that these levels are more fun, they fit the personality of each Cybertronian better, and there's even several levels that have you switching characters in the middle of them.
No thanks. I'll free myself! Wait! I can help you!
Combat and shooting feel generally good and are definitely an improvement over what was seen in the first game, but there's some things here holding it back. I played the game on Xbox 360, and the performance here is really dreadful at times. It can make the aiming feel sluggish, and the game rarely holds a consistent frame rate. Fall of Cybertron has suffered the same fate many other licensed games are doomed to, and it's been pulled down from old digital storefronts. As a result, I'm unable to try the game out on my PC, but I'm sure with a higher and more consistent frame rate, that moment-to-moment gameplay would feel great. The other issue with combat is that movement feels very slow initially. This was really only a problem for me in the first few chapters though, as this can be remedied through the game's new progression system. Perks serve as the game's form of permanent progression. They're purchased at Teletran 1 shops, and any number of them can be active at once. These shops are scattered throughout the campaign, and they accept energon, which is gathered from fallen enemies and breakable objects. The merchant here also has some fun and unique dialogue, depending on the character you're using at the time of interaction.
Megatron's will is the fate of Cybertron.
I dumped almost all of my acquired energon into buying perks since they benefit all characters passively, but there's also some other options the shop offers. You can also purchase usable offensive and defensive items, but I never really found these to be very necessary, and would only really occasionally use them when I was in a pinch. Outside that, the shop lets you equip standard and heavy weapons and upgrade them too. Standard weapons offer more upgrade potential than their heavy counterparts. Each standard weapon also features a unique upgrade, which can only be acquired once all their other upgrades have been purchased. It's fun upgrading the weapons, as it not only makes them more powerful, but it also changes their appearance as well. I generally advise holding off on weapon upgrades until you acquire the perk that lowers their cost, but for the purposes of this video, I had to invest earlier than I normally would have. All unlocked perks, weapons, and upgrades carry over when replaying levels, and you'll certainly need to replay the game a fair bit to unlock all the weapon upgrades and perks on offer. New weapons and usable items can also be unlocked during the campaign by finding blueprints. There's a little bit of cost associated with unlocking a weapon once you found the blueprint, but it's always worth it, as many of the unlocked weapons are more creative and quite powerful. The blueprints are definitely front-loaded in the game, which I don't really mind, because that means you get to use them for longer overall. And the creativity of these guns doesn't quite match Ratchet and Clank, but the whole process of gathering energon, going to the store and upgrading weapons felt familiar in all the right ways for me. There's definitely a noticeable difference in power from when you start the game to when you end it, and it's kind of funny because you start the game as Optimus and you actually feel pretty weak, but later on you end the game as Megatron and you do feel like you're just wrecking shit with him.
You forget, Starscream. It was in this gladiatorial arena I proved myself worthy to lead.
That day has long passed, Megatron.
That day will live forever!
Of course, the ability to transform into alternate mode is still around, and for most characters you can perform this action at any time. I never felt like there was a shortage of ammo for my normal weapons, but alternate modes typically feature 2 guns, one of which has unlimited ammo. A few of the transformations, such as Megatron's, any flyers or Grimlocks, stand out from the crowd due to their power or mobility. Grimlock is easily the most unique case in the game though, as he must build up rage to transform, and he doesn't turn into a vehicle, he turns into an unstoppable dinosaur.
Grimlock smash!
The structure of the campaign in Fall of Cybertron is generally flipped compared to its predecessor. In War for Cybertron, you initially played as the Decepticons and spread Dark Energon, creating a nightmarish scenario that you had to fight through in the back half of the game as the Autobots. In Fall, you take control of the Autobots first, beginning in media res with Bumblebee seemingly dying, before jumping back to earlier in the story. Here, you play as the Autobots for the first 5 chapters before switching to the Decepticons. The Decepticon missions here were definitely faster paced and more fun than the first handful with the Autobots. The final 3 chapters are a mishmash of characters, with you taking part in both sides of the conflict. The last mission in particular has you jumping between characters frequently and helps make the struggle to escape Cybertron feel appropriately epic.
Cables are severed, Optimus. We needn't worry about any more Decepticons trying.
Although Fall of Cybertron improved its visual fidelity and spectacle, there weren't any moments that managed to hit the same peaks as the first game when you have to chase Trypticon as he plummets to the planet below from orbit. In general, there's just way fewer boss fights in Fall of Cybertron. In the previous game, there was at least 1 boss fight per chapter, but given its co-op nature, bosses could have been fun to tag team. The boss fights, journeys into space, and exploration of the planet's depths painted a grander scope for the conflict on Cybertron. War for Cybertron really captured that all-encompassing battle for the ages, whereas Fall of Cybertron truly feels more like an intimate end-of-war story. I'm not going to get too deep into every plot point of the story here, but here's your fair warning for spoilers. By Fall of Cybertron, the war on the planet has evolved into a true resource war for Energon, the lifeblood of Cybertronians and the planet. In the first game, Dark Energon was a major plot point, as Megatron wielded its chaotic power to infect the planet's core. I was definitely caught off guard by how little Dark Energon is referenced directly in Fall of Cybertron, but seemingly it's still empowering the Decepticons and letting them run some strange experiments. To cleanse the planet of its infection, Optimus and his crew placed Cybertron's core into hibernation, which crippled the planet's Energon supplies and would soon turn it into an unlivable husk for millions of years. Many Autobots escaped the planet on galactic vessels at this time, but Optimus and his most loyal allies stayed behind with one last major vessel called the Ark. Fall of Cybertron picks up not too long after the first game, as the remaining Autobots are fighting to gather enough Energon to escape on the Ark. In the first mission, you take control of Bumblebee during the Ark's voyage off-world. This level just serves as a tutorial and takes place at the very end of the story. Bumblebee gets scrapped by Megatron as he makes a desperate attempt to save his leader, and this is teased in the opening pre-rendered cinematic for the game. From here, we jump back in the story to take control of Optimus, helping coordinate efforts to fuel the Ark. It's during these first few chapters that Optimus discovers Metroplex, the titanic Autobot who helps turn the tide of the conflict.
Metroplex heeds the call of the last Prime.
Metroplex is extremely loyal to the last Prime and is always there to watch your back.
Thanks for the assist, Metroplex.
You are most welcome.
Even when the friendly giant appears to be defeated, he shows back up to save Optimus and annihilates Megatron. With Megatron seemingly dead, Starscream usurps control of the Decepticons and escapes, which leads to some turmoil later on. Metroplex's awesome power doesn't come free though, as he consumed the last of the Autobots' energon, which was meant to fuel the Ark. This leads Optimus to send Cliffjumper and Jazz in search of Grimlock, whom he believes may be the key to discovering more fuel. The next two chapters play out with Cliffjumper and Jazz searching for Grimlock in the Sea of Rust. Instead of finding their companion, they find themselves deep in a Decepticon mining complex atop a lake of energon. It's here where you discover a mapping room and an image of Earth and our own solar system. At this point, it's unclear what the purpose of all this is, but it plays into the end of the game. The Autobot pair manages to destroy the mining facility and informs Optimus of the fuel. The Autobots resort to using a gigantic energon transport to haul the fuel back to the Ark, and this is where the campaign shifts to the Decepticons. For the next several chapters, you control the Decepticon squad known as the Combaticons. I had no idea who these guys were, but after doing some research, it seems like they're original characters made for this game. The group frequently butts heads with Starscream, and they can also combine into an extremely powerful and large being known as Bruticus. Up to this point, Fall of Cybertron had been fun, but these chapters cemented it as a step above War for Cybertron for me. The Combaticon chapters are fast-paced and weave together quickly as the troop works together to successfully stop the Autobot energy transport. And although the group is successful, they complete their orders against the explicit commands of Starscream, who jails them immediately following their mission. This leads to further issues inside of the Decepticons, and this leads Soundwave to take matters into his own hands. Soundwave seeks out the remains of Megatron, and you actually control him as he puts Megatron back together better than ever before.
Leon, my lab near the gladiator arenas.
Where is Starscream?
Decepticons! A new age is upon us. Gone are the failures of Megatron.
Ah! Enjoy your brief respite as leader. It will not last.
You really only play as Soundwave for a few minutes before you switch to control of the resurrected Megatron, who is an absolute blast to play as he rips and tears his way through Decepticons and reasserts himself as their leader.
Cowards! Is there no one left who would challenge this pretender to the throne?
Starscream, your mockery of a reign is over.
You will pay for this, Megatron!
As Megatron, you make a move on the facility where the Autobots are holding the remains of Trypticon, a massive reptilian-looking Decepticon whose alternate mode is a space station. I like that the game followed up on the aftermath of this behemoth, as he was an important character in the first game. Trypticon remains in a comatose state, but is released by Megatron and Soundwave, who plan to modify his alternate mode to serve as a spacefaring vessel. Chapter 11 has us catching up with Starscream, who is sowing chaos behind Decepticon lines. The stint of Starscream is brief, but you do get a good sense of how bitter he is. While seeking an advantage over Megatron, Starscream encounters Grimlock, who has been subject to Shockwave's experiments. You switch to controlling Grimlock here and play as him up until the last chapter of the game. During this time, you cut your way through Shockwave's Insecticons and free your squad mates, who have all also been turned into Dinobots. Grimlock is a melee-focused character who plays a bit like Bruticus, and I'm glad we got a couple chapters as him, but anything longer and the gameplay here would have gotten stale. I'm not very familiar with the Dinobots as they weren't featured in any of the Transformers episodes I watched as a kid, but what's not to love about these unique Transformers? After freeing all his brothers in arms, Grimlock sets his sights on revenge and goes after Shockwave. It's during these chapters that you learn the Decepticon scientist has been working on a space bridge to bring the Decepticons to Earth. Grimlock is successful in exacting his revenge, however his rage triggers the space bridge to fire a blast which destabilizes the portal to Earth. This sets all Cybertronians on high alert, and having learned of the Decepticons' plans, Optimus and the Autobots scramble to launch the Ark through the rift. Due to the Decepticons' machinations, the Ark is still low on fuel, leading Metroplex to offer up his life to fuel the vessel.
Your sacrifice will not be forgotten.
There wasn't a ton of direct interaction with this walking city block, but I definitely like him more than Omega Supreme, who was seen in the first game. With little time to spare, the Autobots evacuate the planet where they're intercepted by the Decepticons, as the two duke it out in the final chapter. As I previously stated, the final chapter has you bouncing back and forth between the two sides before circling back to where the game began, with Bumblebee sacrificing himself to save Optimus from Megatron.
Bumblebee! What a waste of energon! After eons of conflict, I finally see the truth of your words, Megatron. And what might that be, Optimus? This universe, no matter how vast, will never be big enough for you and I to coexist.
Optimus goes way fucking harder than he has any right to here, and then the final duel of the game begins, where you can pick to play as either Optimus or Megatron. This duel is pretty savage compared to most of the other fights in the game, as the two are just letting out all their pent up anger, and it's a pretty memorable final fight. Unfortunately, regardless of who you pick, the ending doesn't really change at all. The decision who you play as really only changes the boss encounter and nothing more. After the duel ends, the same final cutscene plays out regardless of who you picked. The two Cybertronian ships lose control and careen wildly through the portal as the game ends, leaving their fate uncertain. At this point, the credits rolled, and it took me about 7 hours to beat the campaign. So where do we go from here? Is this the end of the beloved War of Cybertron game series? Well, yes and kind of no. According to my research, these games fall under the Transformers Aligned continuity, which places them in the same canon as the show Transformers Prime. The pair of games serve as a prequel to the show, so if you're itching to continue the story, that seems like a good place to jump on. I saw at least one comment in my War for Cybertron video telling me that this isn't necessarily the case, but canon and stuff for such a large franchise gets really messy, so I'll just stick to what I saw online and you can tell me in the comments if I'm wrong. In terms of other games that tie into these two, there is one specific case with Transformers Rise of the Darkspark. This is a spin-off of the War for Cybertron games and also serves as a crossover with the live-action Transformer movies. Darkspark was not developed by High Moon and it also reviewed quite poorly. As of now, I don't have any plans to cover the game, but if you really want me to play it, let me know in the comments. The next Transformers game I'll be playing is likely going to be Transformers Devastation, which was developed by Platinum Games. Before ranking the game on my tier list, there are a few other things I want to discuss. I previously stated that Transformers Fall of Cybertron is unavailable on all digital storefronts. If you look at any of the official storefronts, this would appear to be true. However, as of August 2024, you can actually still purchase a digital copy of the game through Amazon, which redeems on Steam. I didn't know this was the case until I was editing this video, and I already own a physical copy of the game on Xbox 360. The game's $50 on the Amazon store, and if you do play on PC, I'd recommend checking out the PC Gaming Wiki page for the game, as it appears there are some fixes that need to be made to have an optimal experience on modern machines. As a 7th generation console title, Fall of Cybertron also shipped with several other game modes outside of its campaign. As you might expect with an old game, none of these game modes are playable via the official means now, as the servers for the game have been offline for quite some time. From what I understand, the game featured a traditional multiplayer that had things like deathmatch, and it also had an escalation mode, which is essentially horde mode. I know people love the multiplayer for War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron, but I've never been able to participate in either. If you've played either of these before, let me know which one you prefer, as I'm curious to hear why. As always, diehard fans are working to keep multiplayer for these games alive via unofficial servers, but you might want to coordinate on Discord or something if you want to find an online match. Finally, we come to the end where I place games I've covered on my tier list. I'll be upfront about the fact that I did have more fun playing through Fall of Cybertron than I did with War for Cybertron. Looking back at my footage for War for Cybertron really showed me how muted the colors for that game were and just the muddy look it had overall. The visuals are certainly nicer in Fall of Cybertron, and while neither game had good performance for me, I think Fall of Cybertron was worse, and I actually had one hard crash of the game as well. If the campaign co-op would have been working when I played War for Cybertron and I went through it with some friends, I think I would have been a bit kinder towards that game. Overall, I think both these games are very solid third-person shooters and are better than the majority of licensed games. Just like its older brother, Transformers Fall of Cybertron also lands on my C+ tier. I think it could have edged its way up to B- had the performance not been so damn poor. I do plan on covering Transformers Devastation in the not too distant future, so if you want to see that video, be sure to subscribe. That's all for now, have a great day, and thanks for watching.